In this video, we'll show you how to replace the upper and lower ball joints on a Honda Accord, and it also is applicable to several Acura models of different years and makes. We're going to first remove the tire so that we can then remove the brake caliper. We can see Brian doing this now. Fairly straightforward. Pull that out of the way, and now we're going to create a little extra room. First, by removing the ABS wiring. And then after that, we're going to move a brake line. Now, bear in mind for both of these, we're not disconnecting the brakes. We're not opening up the braking system. We're not disconnecting the ABS line. We are literally just removing it from its retention points for easier access. And then we're going to hang that brake caliper up and out of the way for better usability. Next, we're going to remove the axle nut. If you do not have a good impact hammer, this is a chance to justify the purchase of one. They can be very tight. After we remove that, we use an impact air hammer to push that back into location, out of its joint, the CV. And now we're going to remove that lower ball joint, removing first the safety pin from that, and then with a 17 millimeter, removing the nut itself. After that's complete, we're going to remove the strut mounting bolt, 17 millimeter, wrench on one side, impact on the other, and we can pull that out. Once complete, a little love tap from a hammer, we should be able to move that out of its joint. And if it's still stuck, just push that through. Air impact might be helpful. Now we have access to the back. To get that ball joint out, we are going to remove a dust ring to create some clearance. That should pop out. And now we can remove the old ball joint. Now you can see Brian's using some air hammers, which are very helpful in a situation like this, and some brute force. Without an air hammer, this one's a little bit more difficult to do. Your arm's going to be tired from pounding it. And we're going to put the new ball joint back in. Now, most vehicles only have a lower ball joint. This is a Honda Accord. They have a great wide ride quality, but they actually have a ball joint on both the lower end and on the upper side, and it's called an SLA suspension, short long arm suspension. So we're going to be replacing both of those ball joints. So there's the lower one, and we're replacing just the ball joint in this situation. We have it forced back into location. We're going to reinstall the dust ring. And once that is complete, we are going to shift our focus to the top side. We're going to put this back in its general location so that it doesn't fall down, and it holds it roughly in place. Now we're moving up to the upper side, and this is the upper side of the short long arm suspension, or the short arm, also known as a control arm. We're going to remove the pin so that we can remove the 17 millimeter nut. Now you'll see he's actually not hitting at the bottom of the pin. He's hitting on the side, and there's enough, just the vibration will break that free the majority of the time. Once that's free, now we're going to actually loosen the strut. We're not going to remove this entire strut. We're just going to loosen it so we can slide it up and down. Two different sizes there, a combination of 12 millimeters and 14 millimeter bolts. So we're going to remove those so that that can drop down a bit, and you can see him dropping it down and moving it out of the way. You do not have to remove this entirely. Brian is taking a shortcut here. But now he's going to remove the control arm. We don't have the opportunity to replace just the ball joint in this, like we did on the lower side. So we're going to replace the entire control arm assembly. It's sold as one unit. So unbolting it from the side and sliding it out. And there is the location. Now we're going to install the new control arm. There you can see it. If you look carefully, there is actually a grease zert on the top. If there's a grease zert on the top, they will last longer because it allows you to re-lubricate these things over time. The problem is most people never lubricate them. So if you install an upper ball joint with a grease fitting or a grease zert on it, make sure you make note to re-grease that every time you change the oil or once a year, and it should last well, for another 100,000 miles plus. So Brian is now lowering that into its approximate location, and he's just going to finger tight that nut, and now everything is in its rough position. And now he's going to tighten it down to its proper 35 foot-pounds. Once that's complete, now we can pull that strut back into its proper location at the right torque spec, and that will do it for the top side of this suspension job. Now we go back to the lower side. We're going to reinstall the lower strut mounting bolt all the way through. And this is 47 foot-pounds. You'll see in a lot of these that the mechanics don't always use a torque wrench on it. They're skilled enough, they get it close enough just by feel and decades of experience. If you don't do this often, I would encourage you to use a torque wrench and get those nuts and bolts right. Now we're putting back on the ABS line and the brake lines and the brake caliper, getting that in location. Those two 17-millimeter bolts are at 80 foot-pounds. That's a relatively high torque setting. So just be aware that we want to make sure that's nice and firm and up to spec. And then reconnecting the brake lines, so everything is held down in its proper factory location. Nothing to vibrate. And then finally, we can go back underneath and torque down that new lower ball joint and install the safety pin. So even if the torque setting is not correct, there is no possibility of that bolt working its way loose. Now we're going to tighten this, the axle nut back in. It's 181 foot-pounds. That's a very high torque setting. And this is a critical junction. So Brian's going to lock that caliper up with a screwdriver, and he is going to torque check that one. This is not one where we want to take a chance. And then once done, there is a small tab that we're going to bend in, which adds a further level of security. Just to be safe, Brian's going to go in there on its first application and top that off with grease until that bubble is relatively full. Remember, take a look at that once a year or so, or every oil change to make sure that you have the proper lubrication in that grease fitting going forward. Now we can put those tires back on, and you're going to be ready to rock and roll. Brian's doing this on a lift. It's also one that's very possible in a garage. And if you're looking to save a couple of bucks, this is a great way to do it. Good job, Brian and David.